Hello and welcome to my channel. Thank you very much for being here. Today we're going to take a close look at a terrible spree of crimes that happened between 1975 and 2006. This story is probably as hard to hear as it is to tell. So if you don't want to hear anything about crimes that are, how should I put this, I guess forcible in nature, usually committed by men, just go ahead and skip this one. Kids should definitely not watch this one, okay? And I'm trying really hard to not have this video demonetized. One, because it's been a long haul getting all of this information together, and two, because I think it's important for us to take a look at this string of cases. And if it gets demonetized, then it likely won't be seen by very many people. So please have patience with me on this one. I'm going to try not to say certain words, and when I fail, I'll probably mute them out. But we all know what I'm talking about here, right? Okay. Before we get into the case, I definitely want to welcome all of you who found my channel because of the Ellen Greenberg videos that Stephanie Harlow did that featured some of my work. Thank you very much for subscribing, and a big thank you goes out to Stephanie for having the integrity to reach out to me and work with me on Ellen's case. Everything of mine that she used was used with enthusiastic permission, so thank you, Stephanie. I also want to remind you all that I'm going to be in London for CrimeCon UK in June. CrimeCon is the world's #1 true crime event, and it's happening on the 11th and 12th of June 2022, which is Saturday and Sunday. At CrimeCon, you can get in the mind of serial killers and psychopaths, learn from criminologists, hear from families and survivors. You can meet your favorite true crime YouTubers and podcasters, and you can immerse yourself in forensic evidence and delve deeper into unsolved crimes. CrimeCon is the ultimate true crime weekend, partnered by CBS Reality, the expert-led true crime TV channel. Please join me there and use code Gavin for 10% off admission. And if you're a patron of mine, you get 15% off. Just DM me inside Patreon and I'll get you the hookup. For more information, you can visit crimecon.co.uk. Okay, let me set the scene here. The place we're talking about is Buffalo, New York. And I learned about this through my friend Matt, who on this channel is usually known as Dr. Gruwell. He's a professor of genetics and genomics at Penn State Behrend, and he helps me with any question I have about DNA. He's also an entomologist, so when I've had questions about bugs, which I have, he's been my go-to. Before he moved to Pennsylvania, he taught at UB, the University of Buffalo, and one time when we were talking about the Amanda Winkowski case, which is one that I've covered at length here on the channel, he brought up that he lived in Buffalo at the time, and there was like huge fear in the area because girls as young as 14 and women as old as 44 were being offended. Again, I'm trying not to use the word with regularity, mostly along the city's bike paths. Now, not being a native Northeasterner myself, it was the first time I'd heard of it. So the story actually starts back in 1957 when a woman named Lucy Caravaggio got pregnant. Her husband was a particularly violent man and prone to drinking to excess, and from what I've read, it seems to me that she did not want to have done that act that got her pregnant. So in order to not be pregnant anymore, she attempted to overdose on pills. What those pills were and how many times she tried is unknown to me. What is known is that she was unsuccessful in her attempt, and her baby boy was born on January 18th, 1958 in San Sebastián, Puerto Rico. It wasn't a happy time for the young family. Lucy's husband was far from doting and caring. Even after his son was born, he continued to do what he'd been doing. And in 1960, Lucy caught him in what has been described as an affair with a prostitute. Now, apparently, she saw this as the perfect time to leave him. At the time, there was an economic depression in Puerto Rico, so moving to the continental United States was a good option for her and almost a million other Riqueños. She ended up moving to Miami, Florida, where her mother lived. Now, because of the depression in Puerto Rico, this was a time of a huge migration of Riqueños to the continental United States. Now, of course, Puerto Rico had been a possession of the United States since 1917, and while they didn't have representation in Congress, they were U.S. citizens and were free to migrate within the U.S. and its territories. Miami was probably a great place to set herself up because there were so many people from her homeland there that shared her culture and her language, and of course, her mom was there to help with her son. But there were probably pretty big challenges finding work because she had to compete with so many migrants. So looking for work, Lucy decided to move one more time and found herself and her son in Buffalo, New York. Now at this point, you'd think that all the hard stuff would be behind her, but unfortunately this wasn't the case. Within a few years, Lucy met a man who is described in reports as her boyfriend. It never says that they got married, nor do reports say they lived together, but my inference is that they did. I think they were domestic partners. Well, it turns out that this guy wasn't a real winner either. Reports say that by his late childhood, Lucy's son was being abused by her boyfriend. It was physical, and it was the other kind too. But he didn't stop with Lucy's son. Lucy also became a frequent target as well. And this led, again, I'm inferring here, to Lucy becoming an alcoholic, at least according to reports. Through it all, her son became adept at hiding all the pain he was experiencing because of his life at home. When he was in junior high and high school, he was described by classmates and teachers as happy but shy. And like most kids his age, he was involved in sports. But because of his shyness and probably his fear of girls, he never had a girlfriend. He just couldn't gather up the courage to go up and talk to a girl. So at this point in the story, with the exception of the migration from Puerto Rico to Miami to New York, this is actually a story that has happened to a lot of kids. Kimberly and I, we talk all the time about how we hit the quote unquote lottery with the families we were born into. I mean, our parents loved us and they continue to love us. They protected us in all the right ways and let us learn some lessons the hard way. We had warm homes and siblings that we love, and we've worked purposefully so our kids can say the same thing when they're our age. But the older I get and the more people I get to know, the more I realize that childhood is crappy for a lot of people. And Lucy's son had a crappy childhood. The philandering father, the drinking mother, the abusive father figure. But what I'm going to tell you next, for me anyway, really is beyond the pale. It's simultaneously sad, tragic, and infuriating. When he was 16, Lucy told her son that his existence was a mistake. She told him that she had tried to terminate him before he was born by overdosing on pills. And guys, you won't be surprised to learn, I'm sure, that this is a time of his life where things took a hard right turn. During his junior year in high school, he began experiencing blackouts. And I'm not sure if that means he actually passed out or if he just lost control. But when he'd come to, he couldn't remember what had happened. And it's just about this time of his life, say the people who've studied his life, that he committed his first attack. And I mean what you think I mean. He was probably 17 the first time, and that was 1975. The woman who was the unfortunate recipient of all that pent-up rage, she was the first in a line of, by my count, somewhere between 15 and 19 women. and it got worse as he went along. And I'm going to talk about that in just a bit. Okay, about 2 years later, Lucy's son enrolled in an industrial arts program at Buffalo State College. This is not to be confused with the University of Buffalo, which is a little further off of the Niagara River. Buffalo State College is situated in a beautiful area of Buffalo and is only about a 5 or 10 minute bike ride to a place called Delaware Park. Delaware Park is a beautiful, grassy and wooded park with a lake, a rose garden, meadows, and tons of biking and walking trails. And Delaware Park is an important place in our story. We're going to get back to it frequently. Anyway, it's 1977, and he's enrolled at Buffalo State College. This same year, a young woman was riding her bike in the area and was attacked by a man who bashed her in the head, and then with a knife, he attacked her. During this attack, he insisted that his name was David. And remember that, David, because it's going to be important in just a minute. In this particular attack, the man is satisfied prior to making any penetration. But for me, that's a distinction without a difference because the attack was violent and personal. Okay, the next year, still at Buffalo State College, Lucy's son meets a young lady named Kathleen Whitley. They begin to date seriously, and just 2 years later, they get married. That was July 5th, 1980. Now, from the outside looking in, it looked like they were a couple of young kids in love. They were going to school. They were getting ready to start a family. But on April 14th, 1981, there's another attack. This time, it's inside Delaware Park. The perpetrator, just like David a few years before, wielded a knife to control his 21-year-old prey, and the attack itself happened near the park's statue of David. Now, over the next 2.5 years, things settle in for the man calling himself David. He and Kathleen have 2 sons. They're born less than a year apart, Christopher and Michael. David gets a good job, a stable job at a company called American Brass. His position has been described as a machinist and a factory worker. Now, whatever his job is at American Brass, it seems good for David. His family is growing and everything is normal. But by November 19th, 1983, whatever was inside him that drove him to do what he did couldn't be ignored anymore. It overpowers him. He goes back to the same location, the bike path near the David statue in Delaware Park. This time, he brings a gun. His 21-year-old victim is left in his wake. A month later, on December 19th, he returned to the park near the statue of David again, where he perpetrated another attack using a gun. But 2 attacks in 1 month didn't satisfy his appetite. 3 days later, December 22nd, 1983, he attacked a 28-year-old woman in Delaware Park. Now, I want to stop here for a moment because I don't want you to think that I'm minimizing anything when I call what David was doing as an attack. These were acts of pure evil against innocent women. I just want to put an exclamation point on this. Please remember what we're talking about without saying the actual word, okay? All right, sometime the following year, 1984, and I don't know exactly when because reports I've read don't say exactly when, there was a turning point in David's life as a serial, I'm going to call it hunter. He went after a 21-year-old woman, and again, he had a gun. But this time, he didn't want to see her face. This is the first time I read that he specifically wanted his victim's eyes to be covered. It appears from what I've read that he set his gun down to cover his victim's eyes with his hands. Again, the reports are vague from almost 40 years ago, so I'm not sure he used his hands, but I'm sure he put down the gun because once his victim saw the gun was down, she grabbed it and began to beat him with it. And let me pause from the story for a minute, one more time, just to say how freaking awesome I think this young woman was. She decided to fight back, and as a dad of 3 girls, I hope my daughters would be as brave were they ever to be in the same situation. Unfortunately for his victim, though, David was able to regain control of the gun. Then he regained control of his victim and did what he went there to do. This event for David must have been terrifying. For the first time, a victim fought back and nearly won. He didn't want that ever to happen again, so his strategy of bringing a knife or a gun had to be changed. If his targets ever got their hands on his weapon, it could be over for him. So he came up with a plan to use something that he could wrap around his prey's neck. This way, he could easily move them however he wanted, and with just a little pressure, they could be unconscious. At this point, David didn't want to take anybody's life. He just wanted to keep doing what he'd been doing without the danger he'd just been in. On April 3rd, 1984, after what I'm sure was meticulous preparation, he found a target he liked, a 22-year-old woman. He encountered her near a railroad overpass less than a mile northwest of the David statue just outside of Delaware Park. His plan was simple. He approached from behind, looped the cord twice around his prey's neck before she even knew what was happening. Then he tightened it. And he took her exactly where he wanted her to go and did exactly what he wanted to do. For David, this was a game changer. He felt empowered. So he increased the frequency of his attacks. On July 8th, 1984, a 21-year-old near the David statue. 1985, he tells his victim once again that his name is David, and he does what he's learned to do so well. June 12th, 1986, he walks along a path in Delaware Park and sees a 44-year-old jogger coming toward him running in the opposite direction. After they pass each other, he turns and attacks her from behind. He uses his new technique to move her into some underbrush. She must have struggled a little too much for his liking because he tightened his cord until she passed out. And that's when he did what he did. She came to later and sought help. In 1986, David didn't think a thing about DNA. He probably had no idea what it was, but this attack would link him to his crime decades later, and we're going to talk some more about this. A little over a month later, on July 14th, 1986, David encountered a 17-year-old high school student walking on a path near Hamburg High School. He used a white clothesline this time, wrapping it twice around the girl's neck and directing her about 300 yards away into a private place to do his deed. And this attack seems to be another turning point for the man calling himself David. Prior to this, most of his victims were college-age women, with one exception. Now he was including teenagers. At this point, police know they have a man out there hunting women. They have a name for him, and they have his description. A Hispanic male, about 160 pounds. And with this description, police arrest a man named Anthony Capozzi, a 220-pound man of Italian descent who's on the autism spectrum. They charge him with 3 counts of the deed that David was doing, and he was convicted on 2 of them. All 3 victims identified him as their attacker in court, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. There's a problem here, though they didn't know it in 1987. Anthony Capozzi did not, in fact, do what he was convicted of. The man calling himself David was responsible for all 3 crimes, and this makes Anthony Capozzi David's only male victim. David's next victim was a 16-year-old girl, same MO. He walked toward her, past her, then quickly turned around and attacked her from behind. She described his weapon as a wire. He wrapped it twice around her neck, took her about 200 yards down the path toward a junkyard, and did his deed. This attack would also be connected to him through a DNA match years later. The next year, he attacked a 22-year-old woman in Delaware Park. For the third and final time, he insisted his name was David. He approached her from behind, but the young woman was able to free herself from his grip, so he ran off. In May of that year, he took control of a 15-year-old girl in the same manner he'd done multiple times before and directed her into an abandoned building near her high school. This time he did something new. He taped her eyes shut. This crime would also be linked to David by DNA years later. And guys, I'm shocked that by this point somebody hadn't died at David's hands. He was escalating things quickly, and he was targeting younger girls. I think he was emboldened by all the success he was having. Success, of course, from his point of view. By this time, the Buffalo police, along with other law enforcement agencies in the area, knew once again that they had a serial hunter on their hands. They did not, however, put two and two together and realize that Anthony Capozzi was likely not ever the hunter they were looking for. He was convicted and out of their thoughts completely. He was just sitting in prison. Apparently, they thought there was another hunter with the exact same MO as before. And then on August 24th, 1989, David attacked a 14-year-old girl on the Willow Ridge bike path using the same MO. This time, not only did he tape her eyes shut, he also taped her mouth. And during this attack, the girl was brought in and out of consciousness. When David finished, he left her unconscious. On May 31st of 1990, he targeted a 32-year-old woman on a shortcut path near Hamburg High School, practically the same place as one of his previous victims. His MO was the same. This victim was unconscious during the entire attack. Now, September 29th of that year was another turning point for David. He attacked a 22-year-old University of Buffalo student named Linda Yalen, this time on the Ellicott Creek bike path in Amherst, New York. Amherst is part of the greater Buffalo area. It's about 6 miles to the northeast from Delaware Park. Anyway, we don't know the method of his attack. It was likely from behind once again. But the reason we don't know is because Linda Yalen did not survive to tell police what happened. Her body was found in some brush along the bike path the following day. A DNA sample of her attacker was collected and later matched to David, though it would be 16 years until that happened. As you might imagine, everything that David was doing was causing fear to grip the Buffalo area. Buffalo police were begging for leads from the public. And 10 days after Linda Yalen's death, they got a good lead. A man named Bob McGuire, who was one of David's co-workers at American Brass, had seen him on the bike path at least twice in the previous 14 months, and it didn't sit well with him. He thought that it was suspicious. So McGuire contacted the Amherst police and gave them a name: Artemio Sanchez. Artemio Sanchez, other than the suspicion he raised in Bob McGuire, was not what you'd think of when you thought about what David had been doing. He had been married to the same woman, Kathleen Sanchez, for 20 years. He had 2 sons, Christopher and Michael, who were 18 and 19 years old. Sanchez had even coached his boys in Little League and basketball. His camouflage was perfect. So perfect that even with surveillance on his house, the Amherst police couldn't make a case against him. And on January 31st, 1991, Artemio Sanchez voluntarily went in for an interview with Amherst police. They questioned him for about an hour, took his fingerprints, and then let him go. They still couldn't make a case. But this must have scared Artemio because he pretty much stopped what he was doing cold turkey. He lasted almost 2 years without an attack. And how did he do that? After such an exhausting pace, how did he stop? Well, in May of 1991, he was arrested in Buffalo for solicitation of an undercover police officer. So that might be the answer right there. He ended up being charged for loitering, and he paid a fine. Then, on November 22nd, 1992, he engaged a prostitute that he had apparently encountered before. According to his story, he didn't have any plans to do anything other than what one does with a prostitute. But to make it exciting, he put a plastic bag over her head. She obviously didn't like that, began to fight him, and because she could identify who he was, he decided to go ahead and remove her soul from the world. He left behind a DNA sample that investigators collected. And that's 2 women now. 2 women that paid the ultimate price to Artemio Sanchez, in addition to the 18 other women who paid a price almost as steep. Things were now out of control for Artemio Sanchez, and for a person who craved control, this must have been unacceptable. So he tried stopping again, cold turkey again. It was 23 months before whatever it was that made him do what he did made him go out on the hunt again. On October 19th, 1994, it was a 14-year-old girl that he set his sights on. A DNA sample was collected from that crime as well. Whatever happened that October day, inside Artemio Sanchez's mind, it was life-changing. And I say that because Sanchez stopped what he was doing for 12 years. But you can tell by what he was doing over those 12 years that he was struggling. He wanted to hunt, but he kept himself from doing it. On the 6th anniversary of the death of Linda Yalem, Sanchez actually ran in the Linda Yalem Memorial Run, a 5K run that was held in Linda's memory that promoted personal safety awareness and crime prevention programs. His bib number was 679. 3 years later, on September 23rd, 1999, Artemio Sanchez was arrested for a second time in Buffalo, New York, after being caught in the company of a prostitute. The charge again was reduced to loitering, and he paid another fine. I'm sure he was active doing something, but as far as reports show, Artemio Sanchez was still abstaining from his normal activities all the way to September 29th of 2006, which was the 16th anniversary of the death of Linda Yalem. I can only speculate that he chose that day because his life was existentially altered when he attacked Linda Yalem. Maybe he was mourning, or maybe even celebrating the passing of his parents. Lucy had died in May of 2005, and Artemio Sr. died earlier in 2006. Whatever the reason, that September 29th is the day he stopped stopping. Sanchez went to the Clarence Newstead bike path. There he found a 45-year-old jogger named Joan Diver. He did not attack Joan the way he had almost all of the others. He just removed her soul using the tool that he'd used all those years to control all those women and girls. And while he didn't do to Joan what he'd done many times before, he did leave a DNA sample that was later collected by investigators. The DNA he left behind was a single droplet of sweat, which he left in Joan Diver's car. It matched the DNA from the other victims, but investigators didn't have the name of the perpetrator. They did, however, have a suspect from all those years ago when Bob McGuire reached out to Amherst police about his co-workers' suspicious activities. So, on January 13th, 2007, Altemio and Kathleen Sanchez went out to dinner at a place called Soleil Restaurant south of Buffalo. It's a beachfront restaurant alongside Lake Erie. After they left, law enforcement collected a linen napkin, a dish, and a straw that Altemio Sanchez had used during their meal. They sent those samples to the lab for testing and comparison. The following day, the results were in. Altemio Sanchez was their man. So the next day, January 15th, 2007, Sanchez was taken into custody and interrogated for 9.5 hours. After the interrogation, he was placed under arrest, and about a week later, he was indicted for the murders of Linda Yalem, 2 counts, Majane Mazer, I'm probably not pronouncing her name correctly, 1 count, and Joan Divers, 1 count.
I don't believe there's any presence of conscience here or any remorse whatsoever, except that you were caught. And you were caught by the men and women in the first 2 rows. In the case before me, 3 women have been slain and their families have been hurt beyond repair. All they have now are loving memories and nightmares, and none of them deserve this.
The overall impression I have of the defendant, Judge, is he is as calculating as he's violent. These weren't spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment, reckless acts. The defendant methodically selected his locations, conducted reconnaissance, and even practiced his very advanced, his signature double loop ligature technique so he could control his victims while he humiliated them, while he made them suffer, and while he killed them. There's not many people around like that, Judge. You've been in the system a long time. I've been in the system a long time. There's not many people like that. Linda Yalem was the first woman the defendant murdered. She was 22 years old. She had the rest of her life in front of her. She had the rest of her life in front of her is until that day, that fateful day, that she ran past this guy. September 29, 1990. Mr. Sanchez made this choice to subject this young woman to the terror and the humiliation of rape. Mr. Sanchez made the choice to kill her with a double loop ligature, a wire. And if that wasn't enough, he also made the choice to duct tape her nose and to duct tape her mouth. He made the choice to kill her. Intentional murder.
At first, it appeared that Sanchez would plead not guilty to the 4 counts he was indicted on, but on May 16th, 2007, he pleaded guilty to all 4 counts.
I know I'm going to be spending life behind bars, never to see the streets again. But I committed, I did these crimes, and I should pay for these crimes. To Mr. Diver and the Yalem family, I apologize, but I know I can never bring back your loved ones. But what you said today here in court was true about me, and I will pay for this for the rest of my life.
On August 14th of that same year, he was sentenced to a total of 100 years to life, though effectively it's 75 years to life because count 2 runs concurrent to count 1.
That you be sentenced to an indeterminate sentence of imprisonment, which shall have a maximum term of life and a minimum term of 25 years. Regarding count 2, for the rape and murder of Linda Yalom, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to an indeterminate sentence of imprisonment, which will have a maximum term of life and a minimum term of imprisonment of 25 years. Count 2 by law must run concurrently with count 1. Regarding count 3, for the murder of May Jane Mazer, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to an indeterminate sentence of imprisonment, which will have a maximum term of life and a minimum term of 25 years. The sentence on count 3 is to be served consecutively to the prison terms imposed in counts 1 and 2. Regarding count 4, for the murder of Joan Diver, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to an indeterminate sentence of imprisonment, which shall have a maximum term of life and a minimum term of imprisonment of 25 years. The sentence on count 4 is to run consecutively to the prison terms imposed in counts 1, 2, and 3. The aggregate period of incarceration is an indeterminate term of 75 years to life.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Please rise. State Supreme Court Part 27 is now in recess.
Now, let's go back to Artemio Sanchez's only male victim, Anthony Capozzi. By 2007, he had served 20 years of his 35-year sentence. Once Sanchez had been convicted, Capozzi's attorneys requested that the DNA samples of the assailant taken from 2 of Capozzi's supposed victims be tested. And wouldn't you know, they matched Sanchez. That evil man let another man take the fall for his crimes and spend 20 years in prison, only to be exonerated by DNA evidence later. Anthony Capozzi received a $4.25 million settlement from the state of New York and is still living as a free man.
And good evening, everyone. It's the latest chapter in one of the most earth-shattering cases in Western New York legal history.
And this comes 3 years after DNA evidence set Anthony Capozzi free after the capture of bike path rapist Artemio Sanchez. News 4 senior correspondent Rich Newberg brings us the latest tonight. Rich?
Well, the settlement for Anthony Capozzi is $4.25 million. It is believed to be the largest settlement ever of any court of claims case of its kind in New York.
It's all over now. I served the time they wanted.
For about 22 years, Anthony Capozzi suffered for 2 rapes he did not commit, spending close to 20 of those years in state prisons while battling schizophrenia. The $4.25 million settlement by the state for Anthony's wrongful imprisonment was accepted by his family with mixed emotions.
Number one, my mother wasn't here to enjoy it. Number two, Anthony's not healthier to enjoy it. And, as far as, dollar amount, you can never put a price on somebody's life.
For 2 decades, Anthony's late mother, Mary, had prayed almost every day in church that her son would be exonerated.
I have dreamt of this day so many times.
My mom knows me very well. She knows I need help and care and attention.
This extraordinary family never gave up, believing in Anthony's innocence. Former Buffalo police investigator Dennis Delano, whose unrelenting public efforts helped free Capozzi, believes the state should have paid more in penalties and paid it out sooner.
3 years later, we're still talking about this. This should have been done right away. Anthony's getting nothing but worse, all of this time. He needs quality treatment, and basically he's just being maintained, which is what he has been doing for 22 years.
Capozzi family friend Russell Yanello agrees.
I think it should be more. Really. He went through a lot of grief, which was absurd.
But Anthony's attorney, Tom DiAugustino, told me his negotiations with the state attorney general's office led to the highest settlement of its kind in New York ever paid in a wrongful imprisonment case.
Now we can be sure that Anthony will be taken care of for the rest of his life. That's the main thing, I would say.
Anthony Capozzi is in a group home, but without the settlement money, his family says they have not been able to greatly improve his care or his health. Coming up at 6, we'll hear more from former Buffalo police investigator Anthony Delano about the case and the settlement. Reporting live, Rich Newberg, News 4 at 5.
I want to mention a couple of connections between this case and another one I've covered at length, which again is the case of Amanda Winkowski. First, the only police officer, at least as far as I know, to ever come to the realization that Anthony Capozzi was innocent was a guy named Detective Dennis Delano. He worked with Capozzi's family to prove his innocence and get him released. Dennis Delano also worked with Amanda Winkowski's family to get a second autopsy done to prove that she didn't die accidentally. This is a good guy who, as far as I can tell, is a true seeker of justice. So, my hat's off to you, Dennis. Good on you. Second, the person from the DA's office who tried the case against Altemio Sanchez is a guy named Frank Sedita. Sedita eventually became the district attorney in Erie County, New York, which is where Buffalo is. And Sedita became one of the roadblocks when it came to getting Amanda Winkowski's case investigated. He simply would not investigate or prosecute the case. And as far as I'm concerned, he holds the sole responsibility for justice not being served for Amanda. He came to be known as Softball Sedita by some people in Buffalo because he simply refused to prosecute a case unless he had a slam dunk. And that was excruciatingly painful for the families of victims whose cases he didn't prosecute, like Amanda's. But I found an interview with Frank Sedita that was done years after the Altemio Sanchez case. Take a look at this.
He stonewalled police investigators when he was first arrested, but after pleading guilty to 3 murders, Altemio Sanchez wanted to open up, but to one man specifically.
He didn't want to talk to them. He wanted to talk to me for whatever reason.
At the time, Frank Sedita headed up the Homicide Bureau in the Erie County District Attorney's Office.
My main purpose is I wanted to get some corroboration on some other crimes that we had suspected him of. But part of it was a morbid curiosity. I wanted to see what made this guy tick.
On August 3rd, Sedita, accompanied by 2 DA's office investigators, sat down face to face with a man suspected of being a monster.
What was the point that you got a peek behind the curtain and really saw the frightening side of this guy's brain?
I think it was toward the beginning of the interview. I was doing some background things and trying to get a sense of his family. And he said his mother was a heavy drinker, and she took up with another guy, and he was starting to whimper and to cry. And I just looked at him and I said, well, there's a lot of people that have dysfunctional lives, but they don't end up repeatedly raping and killing people. And just total switch to his personality. Total switch to his affect and demeanor. Dry, matter of fact, no more emotion, just boom,
like
boom,
Jekyll and Hyde.
boom. Yeah.
What goes through your head when you see that type of transformation?
It just kind of confirmed what I kind of theorized in my mind, that he was extraordinarily compartmentalized, which is what a lot of sociopaths are.
It must have gotten frightening to see what makes this guy tick.
He wasn't scaring me, but what was starting to turn my stomach were his description of these events, and not so much the details of the rapes and murders, because I already knew the details of the rapes and murders, okay? But what disturbed me was the matter-of-fact manner in which he described them. No different than the tone that you and I are speaking in right now. He really enjoyed controlling people with this very intricate double loop ligature that he used and was able to manipulate, and he was quite good at it. He described it as a click in my head where I went from I went from husband and dad to animal. That's the quote that he said. Is that true or not? I don't know, but that's what he claimed. Just fascinating in a way how he could go from one extreme to another. It leaves you with a very creepy feeling after talking to somebody like that, to think that there really are, it's not just in movies, there really are people out there like that. We were pretty confident that we could prove 8 rapes and 3 murders, but he was suspected of a lot more. And by the end of the sit down, he admitted to 4 additional rapes, so he got up to 12 rapes and 3 murders.
Closure on cases, closure for families, but for a man named Anthony Capozzi, it meant more than just closure. You see, he was in prison for 22 years, wrongfully convicted of 2 rapes to which Sanchez admitted during his interview with Sedita. Capozzi was exonerated. Sedita says that's the part of the case that's hung with him, even as he rose to the office of district attorney and now to the state Supreme Court.
There were times that you got criticism for not prosecuting and you know, only taking the easy cases where a lot of your critics said. Was that the result of Capozzi? The fact that you were so thorough in looking over these cases and making sure?
Yeah. Did I have rigorous prosecution standards? Yes. Were they in large part because of Capozzi? Yes. I didn't want that wrong to occur again.
It appears to me that the injustice that was done on Anthony Capozzi by the Erie County DA's office had a huge effect on Frank Sedita. And from what I gather from that video, he never wanted to run the risk of convicting another innocent person. And while I think he overcorrected to the detriment of Amanda's family and others, I understand why he would do that. I'm not condoning what he did. I'm just saying I understand how convicting an innocent person would weigh heavy. So that's the case. Everything that I've told you today is well documented over on my website. There's a case page for the victims of Altemio Sanchez that includes court documents and a detailed timeline with sources. I invite you to check that out. There's a link in the description. And I'm sure you know by now that I have lots of other cases that I'm diving into. Hopefully I'll have some updates for you on each of those cases very soon. In the meantime, I bid you adieu and hope to see you next time. Take care. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below.